is there any, do you feel any wind coming in anywhere?
Yeah, there's one.
A little bit of wind, yes, it's good to have, maybe, you know, just a little bit, yeah. And the one just right there, that's the high, oh, I guess open. Okay, that's great. To simplify, big models of globalization in the 18th and 19th centuries were first. And this is not yet there. This is prior to what's on the screen. Were Adam Smith's markets, whom Smith opposed the market enemy, was the high tariff of the state government is interfering with the free market. Second, Lenin's goal, capitalism, where the last Marxist stages were states fighting war until one dominates the entire world. Okay, these were two opposing late 19th century, 20th century big theories of globalization. Global capitalism was Lenin's term. Marx had talked about this a bit, but not really so much on a global scale as Lenin stressed it. Later we have international relations theories, and these tend to be much more nation state and more stressing regional domination and proximity weighted by military and economic strength. Maybe the sense of nationalism. But what guides us now? All of these are operating in some way and more. That is, what all these share, or these three in different ways, are stressing the national state. Although Adam Smith's market minimizes state regulation and includes the firm, if you will, or the entrepreneur, but not so much local governments. These are all pretty loose and overly general, and what we try to do is to codify them in the propositions in the syllabus. And it looks long, as I said, but the literature we tried to put into a way that it could be codified, refuted, tested, or said it ought to be increased or decreased if this happens. One way I'll add one more thing, just put on the board to make it a little more work for us. Drew takes her hand over here. So we can have say x1, x2, xn. And leave the y. Okay. This says, in a sense, all of these might be right. They might be operating, but is it just capitalism? Is it just what's the markets? Instead, we may have terms like A, B, and C, which say how strong is that factor. And so it's not that it's just one. What this says is multi-causality. And in the early to mid 19th century, people didn't talk about this. This came in the late 19th century with Max Weber, with statistical modeling, both of them. We then get into a little later, the whole sense of the world is more relative. Einstein's the relativity theorem. Philosophers talked about anthropologists, cultural relativism. That we in the West around England or France, we're the center of the world. The revolution was 1789 for the world. Okay. 50 years, 100 years later, people say, the center of the world may maybe is not just Paris anymore. It's also Beijing. It's also Buenos Aires. It's also, and they have, in some places, a lot longer history and more complications in Mumbai than we do in Europe. So one way is to say, maybe another way to put this is we could have globalization, which I'm not defining for the moment, but this could be one factor which could transform the workings of A, B, and C. And we could call it G1, G2, different ways, simply to make the point that each of these coefficients can affect each other in different ways. And in that way, we can model this like that easily enough. Haha. If you're doing this for all of GNP, they have these days a couple of thousand equations like this. All kinds of things which try to say these fit together, and if you have an increase in bowling and more people go bowling, or more people do the arts, how much does the growth of the arts transform the growth of jobs in Silicon Valley compared to Kansas? And the result, which a recent PhD has shown, it's a lot bigger in the computer industry than it does in agriculture and manufacturing. The importance of the arts being discovered even in empirical, quantitative, large-scale way without seeing any artist in person is a small revolution. We'll see that as a substantial issue through the course. But I'm introducing it in that sort of way because that's actually part of what we first saw it, because people, artists would say, oh sure, artists are very important. Artists is the world, But were there any numbers that support that? You start to get numbers like this. Hey, they're saying the same thing. Artists are important. Okay, how important? That's a trickier question. And it's not so important. We have maps. It's not so important in the Midwest and small towns and in the South. But you look around Boston to Washington, LA area, San Francisco area, they're big impacts. Huh. And that, I'll just mention this for playing this up a little bit more. We then have the chicken and egg problem, which we're doing diagrams. I'll do one more. Sorry, I'm asking you to do one more. We could have, I have it here. Yeah, we can just use one of these. A, B, C, D. And we could do the same for x1, x2, and x3. That is does y increase x, or does x increase y? That is, which is the chicken and which is the egg? And the metaphor says really depends on the time period. Okay, and so this is why we've done this with time period analysis. And we find again the relative strength of D related to A, or as a ratio of D to A, changes in the Midwest and the South versus the two coasts and Chicago. This is the third coast, whatever, sometimes. And internationally, we're finding things like this as well. The discovery of the arts is something which lots of other people, political scientists, Robert Putnam, Harvard guy, wrote bowling alone, huge impact. In Washington, the White House, about 20 copies of the book and so forth. What's he say about the arts? Doesn't mention it. There's one page which is trivial, and we see that in this book. Tocqueville, that is, what does this matter? Putnam is carrying forward, he's the leading exponent today of Tocqueville. Tocqueville, you probably know about. Many said the most important social theorist interpreting the U.S., the history, the culture, the background, in contrast with the old European traditions, especially France. Well, how about Asia? It fails. It fails in the sense that, says a PhD here, Seoko Kim, Korea. He had a lot of data on citizen participation in civic organizations. And Putnam was coming out with this book. And if you have more people who participate, you have more legitimacy in the White House, in City Hall, with neighbors. And if they don't go out and participate in civic organizations, they distrust each other. Does that matter? Well, his argument, the main argument was, if you don't have people civically engaged in Lions clubs, Boy Scouts, Baptist churches, you don't trust the government. And if they don't trust the government, they don't vote, or they vote for changing the government. Faster, harder, deeper. And does that relate and change? Okay, so these things, okay, so the point of that is, what happens if you go to his native Korea was, does this work in Korea? And the answer was, no, it didn't work. That is, the Koreans belong to more civic organizations, especially churches, than in the U.S. Does that lead to Koreans, if you're Korean who goes to more churches or more organizations, if you have more Koreans who are participating, do those Koreans who participate more trust more? The answer was no impact. Then we said, hey, is that just Korean? We said, well, and we have across the Midway NORC, we have the data at ISSP, it's called. Let's run that for the rest of the world, wherever we have surveys. The answer was Brazil, Portugal, China, and Russia had basically zero impact. Whereas in Northern Europe, Protestants had a bigger impact. Southern Europe, not so much. But Russia, most of Eastern Europe, Portugal and Spain are different. We still don't have a clear answer to that, but because of that, we then spent 6-8 years meeting with people. We have about 15 co-authors in this book, from deliberately, 2 from Portugal, because we really wanted to, what's the difference between Portugal and Spain? We still haven't answered that in a compelling way. Okay. We met with mainly Koreans, Chinese, Japanese. Why are these things different? Who's Tocqueville? We have karaoke. What's the difference between karaoke and the Baptist church or something else? Karaoke traditionally, who's from Asia? Why is karaoke maybe different from a Baptist church? We got 2 experts in China. What do you say? What do you say, guys? I mean, how many people did you know, and did your parents and other people you know generally sang karaoke? And where and why did they do so? Was it with the family? Was it with the work group? Was it with whom?
I guess both with my friends and with my family members. I guess about half of the people that I've known go to karaoke regularly.
And most are friends, not workplace.
Right.
Okay, now that's interesting that you answered so clearly. That is traditionally, or that is, did you hear ever of karaoke at work? Not really. Okay, now see, that's very interesting. And I'd say that implies an ethnographic potential change in China, at least from your friend, because you guys are sophisticated observers of this stuff. A lot of the literature says many of the workers work from not just 9 to 5, they work until 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. often. Then after work, they'll have drinks, they'll have dinner, and then sing karaoke 11 p.m. with their workplace. Okay, if it's the workplace working together, is it as independent as the family or as the Baptist church? Maybe is that an Asian difference? And that's why I'm saying we're getting conflicting bits of evidence. Okay, we got a lot of propositions, we got a lot of data, a lot of efforts to try to and test it in different ways. We got other things here too. We got two things. Legitimacy and trust is one with Tocqueville. The other is, how about economic development? How much is creativity and the model of European creativity, one of the most important. Both these are French theories. Tocqueville, Balzac, Baudelaire. Okay, what was the theory of Balzac and Baudelaire about creativity? And what could you do to enhance it? Balzac's a novelist. Baudelaire's a poet, although they both wrote essays. Baudelaire said, we need to have creativity, new ideas, brilliant novels. Balzac and in England, Dickens were the first people who were really big global stars, global in the English and the French world. And the position of Balzac was, if we want to really do things creatively, we ought to have the artists be able to live together. So they lived in a little neighborhood in Paris called Montmartre, and then later on became the Left Bank, and then other areas where Bohemianism, the term Bohemian was, we don't follow the rules of la bourgeoisie, the middle class. That's the new term. Even in China, middle class, they don't use bourgeoisie for China. This then leads up to Jane Jacobs, Richard Florida, Ed Glaser, Schumpeter. Creativity, destruction, creative destruction is part of capitalism and essential for economic growth, especially the cutting edge. Schumpeter. Okay, and then digging into these, Schumpeter also spent a lot of time on why does democracy work? He's a Austrian German, came to Harvard, and struggled with this with the House of Parliament. Studied the subtlety, and for an economist, this was very interesting. Digging in, what were the rules of the games? That was not just, there's no constitution in the House of Parliament for England. That is, and a lot of Germans have a big legalistic view, follow the law, and maybe some people do. If there's no law, there's no constitution, then what makes it work? It leads to the focus on action. What do people actually do? Not just what does the law say. In Chicago, we have nonpartisan elections. It doesn't put the name of the party on the candidate. This is the strongest political party locally in the U.S. Has been. This is the machine politics in Chicago. The real experts who wrote about this, they grew up studying Sovietologists. They really knew how the party worked. And they said, oh, Chicago's like that. Chicago does not have civic organizations traditionally. In the 19th century, they had militias. There was a mayor in the early 19th century. I think he was the grandnephew of Daniel Boone, the Boone-skin cat kind. His name was Boone, and he was with a party where they wanted to make America more American. And he said, we're going to fire anybody whose name is Irish in the fire department or the police department. One of those militias, one of the Irish militias, started a march on City Hall when that word went out. He didn't have enough police to defend himself at City Hall. So he found German and other militias and some Irish militias who protected City Hall because they could have been burned down or shot, whatever. The militias were a little different from what Tocqueville wrote about in Western Massachusetts, where people would build fences together and they would be good neighbors. Okay, people were marching. Okay, they weren't just for shooting. They also had picnics. They had families that would march together up to Milwaukee and have family celebrations, etc. But Chicago's a little bit different. And we will often use Chicago in part because it's a terrific outlier. Not only is it right here, I've been doing an oral history for 30 plus years, more than that. When the election started with the election of Harold Washington, and I teamed up with the campaign manager himself, who'd written some of the best books on black politics in Chicago. And we did it for years, and then a group of us have continued together studying Chicago and cities in a bigger context, and it's great stuff. Then people who are challenging us in what we've been saying in New York, and then in LA. So we have these so-called Chicago, New York, and LA schools, but Chicago was the source of all this stuff in the 1920s, where social science was really the leading university in the world at that point, say in the U.S. at least. Well, they didn't have social sciences only came into universities about the same time as this university was founded, so they managed to get an edge, and so social science tended to be really strong here, whereas Harvard, Yale, and Princeton tended to be stronger in the humanities, traditional, literary, artistic kinds of disciplines, and that still is to some degree the case. But the couple of big things for the course in general: multi-causality, interaction effects, or we can call that interaction. That's a normal statistical label. It also is called mediating. That is, globalization mediates the paths from X1, X2, and X3. And so those G1, G2, and G3 are mediating paths. And so that's the idea of not just using a term and saying because that's statistical. The question is, you can think more clearly. My collaborator, Dan Silver, has done a series of papers showing that social science theory can be more powerful and more sharp and more compelling if you use stuff like this. Draw pictures. Whereas in economics, in Keynes in the 1920s, 30s, he wrote more literary style economics. He had a publishing house and invested there. They worked with the artists and so forth. Paul Samuelson was a student here, late 1930s. So we want to make this into real science. With Samuelson now, and then MIT in leadership with Samuelson, economics became math. And so I've talked to economists, and it'd be simpler to the average person who doesn't want to have 27 equations. How about just showing a picture or two? Oh, I couldn't publish that in an economics journal. Okay. Today, our top people here with Nobel Prize winners are doing things like this and telling stories, making pictures. They publish books with titles like Freakonomics. Gary Becker and their students, and Becker was trained and really did math, and Glaser, the top urban economist at Harvard, trained here with Becker. Glaser's now doing videos showing him in Brazil with a black tie and a tuxedo, saying, here's how much more you have to pay and how much difference it makes if you drive from Evanston to Chicago, because they're bumps. Bumpy roads increase taxes, maybe, but it also slows down people driving, and it decreases the amount of revenue generated by all of those firms who drive from Evanston, and then here's the dollar amount. Okay, so he says that. Sorry. Doesn't have a single picture or equation. He has a nice suit. Okay. So economics is changing very rapidly right now in this leading department of the world. You can find all these things still being done by different full professors in the economics department, not to mention the other social sciences. The historians and the economists saw the importance of what they, and I should put it up, I could write it out there, but you know how it's spelled. Amenities. What's an amenity? How many of you are majoring in economics? Not one? Usually we have more than that. Okay. I think if you look at the numbers, there's more than one. Okay. But what's an amenity? Anybody, whether you've had an economics course majoring or not? Yes?
Just a guess here. Maybe just like nice things for society to have, like luxury goods and things that are not like crucial for survival, but people like, that sort of help society.
Okay. Yes, that's good as far as it goes. Let's try to say, how could we quantify that idea?
I guess you could.
Could we?
You'd have to make a lot of parameters when you count, I guess, by service tickets.
How could we quantify it based on what you're here in the room right now? What if you, when you got a BA, and you're thinking about getting a job, and you're offered a job working in Chicago at $100,000 a year, and then you're worried you're offered the same kind of job, or let's even say from the same company, as a branch in North Dakota in a town of 2,000. You could work in the town of 2,000 in North Dakota, and you'd be paid $200,000, twice as much. How many of you would take the job in Chicago? And how many would take the job in North Dakota? So Chicago first? A little up higher, okay. All right. Anybody who's ready to go to North Dakota? Okay. Okay. So that why would you go to North Dakota?
The nature?
Okay. All right. Did you say nature or financial?
Nature.
Nature. Okay. There we go. So we do have some people like that. Anybody else say nature? And how many others say the money?
Both.
Both. Okay. Okay, so that's why it gets more complicated. See, we have both a nature effect, mountain biking, skiing, terrific stuff. But most USC students, as you saw, will give up $100,000 of a potential salary, and they'll stay in Chicago, New York, or LA with you. If you're mayor of Chicago or New York or LA, how much should we invest in having more parks, maybe nature nearby, maybe having sports and marathon races on Lakeshore Drive, closing down the traffic, having all kinds of, that is, having 4 months of festivals in Chicago, bringing and attracting and keeping people who live here. And there are, I'll ask you that, in 4 Mile downtown area, relative to its suburban growth in New York, Chicago, LA, Austin, Berkeley, which has the most growth in the age cohort from 25 to 34? This is the last roughly 20 years. It goes up and down a bit like this. Which of these cities has the most growth of that young age cohort in the downtown area? Chicago. Chicago has more growth in its downtown than Austin, Madison, LA, and so forth. Yes. Not always, not in all the time periods, but the idea this is a cold, dirty, industrial old city, but Daily One, not Daily One, Daily Two discovered the arts. He went to these conferences. He went to Paris, and hey, Paris is a little. They got buses, bus stops that are pretty. What do we have now? Where do the bus stops come from? They're bought by, they're built by, they're maintained by little buses, little cars, camionette, where they maintain. It's a little French company. They're out there in Chicago because Daley said, yeah, we want to have Paris bus stops. They're nicer than those old things in Chicago. We have boulevards in Chicago, Martin Luther King Drive, etc. We're going to have more trees. Build these up. And the city was deeply transformed. When I first came here, I didn't want to spend the summers here, at least. I don't go away. We got better French bread than in many French bakeries. Okay, in some places, some bakeries, here and there, and here in Paris. Okay, okay. What's the policy implication if you're the mayor and you're the mayor's financial advisor? You've been hired by the mayor. How much should we spend on amenities to build up bus stops, subsidize marathons with bigger prizes that people will come here? The biggest triathlons in the world, triathlon most popular, I did this for decades, was in Chicago. You swim on Lake Michigan, look up those skyscrapers. Wow, that's impressive. So people come here from all over, and the pros who come here because they get huge prizes. Those kinds of things are supported, and Daley knew from these kinds of things from social scientists, like me, Ed Glazer, Florida, and so forth, talking to the business, civic, and other leaders, And I had here in this classroom like this, I had two of the top women from the business sector and from the city government, and said, you know, are you doing things like amenities, you know, street festivals, marathons, and so forth? Is the mayor interested in that? And the first time they said, oh yes. I asked, the next year they came back, I invited them back, same two people. I asked them the same question. It's the same mayor, Mayor Daley too. I said, is the mayor paying attention? We make 2 suggestions and he has 8 ideas on how to do it better. He discovered this, and I figured out what happened. What happened, and what was that year? In that year, I should try to remember from memory. I think it was 1987. I got to check my notes next to be sure. But the point is, what happened in that year was that the Democratic Party had its national convention at the United Center. The Art Institute had a massively successful show that people were flying in from Japan and France and so forth to see the show. And the third thing was the international soccer games were being held, bringing in soccer crowds internationally. Those 3 met Daley himself and the others in Chicago said, hey, this is a globally important city. Maybe we're doing something which in some ways we're making equal to, better than Paris or Rome or Beijing. Okay, maybe not. Do we have thousands of years of culture the way that they do in Beijing? No. But Chicago, no. But Beijing has a leg up, so etc. So, how much should you advise the mayor to spend? Yeah, but okay, make it a number. If we're having USC students and you're representative of the results, actually, often I would say 20 years ago, more often, I've asked this in most classes, 20 years ago, most students would be almost 100% would stay in Chicago. I had 1 year where it was about 50-50. That was a wild year. But most of the time, okay. So how much should you spend if you're advising the mayor? Are all the citizens USC students? No. Is this higher if you're a USC student? Maybe. Probably yes. But how about race, income, gender, age? How much do these make an impact on how much you should advise to the mayor? And the answer is, maybe it depends on the neighborhood, maybe it depends on the social characteristics of individuals. And yes, that's the kinds of numbers that we're getting here. But we should pay attention. We should, Ed Glazer, who did the paper on the cost of driving from Evans to Chicago, he just mentioned those cities. He was in Brazil, just mentioned these names of cities, assuming everybody in Brazil knew about Evans to Chicago. So the follow-up of Glazer was a leading paper, big research report for Brookings on how important are amenities for cities. And his basic conclusion was amenities are more important, non-financial decisions, non-financial attractions are more important for urban dynamics than what you pay for. He did another paper with about 100 variables on happiness. That is, when the NORC started doing surveys of happiness, the economists said, no, we don't want to use it. That's not a revealed preference. A revealed preference is 30 years ago were popular among economists. They said, you know, you don't want these surveys. People just lie. So then that's changed. The economists are going wild studying happiness surveys. So, and it's happening in China, in France, they're studying economists are really studying happiness. And Glaser's done a paper. Is it income? Is it occupation, occupational status? Is it education? Those are maybe X1, X2, X3. And then you had 100 variables, roughly. What matters most? Are you highly questioned? Do you live alone, or are you married? Are you part of a family? Do you have a significant other? Do you have many friends and so forth? Those things, social connections, those kinds of dimensions were much more important than income, occupation, and education. Okay. And we found the same kinds of things in cities and entertainment machine. What really drives cities? You could have a city hall today under daily 2. You knock from daily 2 onward. You knock on the door of City Hall and say, what's the economic base? What's the leading industry of the driver of the city? Chicago. Entertainment. They don't say financial futures or hogs or sports, music. Whether they renamed the South Mile of Michigan Avenue south of the Chicago River. The North Mile is called the $1 Million Mile, or etc. Fancy places. The South Mile has got the Art Institute, the Symphony, museums, etc. And they renamed it to the Cultural Mile. I'll bring in Chicago examples like that to say that there's some smart mayors that pay attention to this more than do most social scientists. Political science and sociologists, no. Economics drives everything. The economists, humanities are more important. The historians in this case, this is spreading around. It's more differentiated within all these departments. But historically, it's funny to talk to and read books by political scientists and sociologists. Still talk about money drives everything, and it's high income, high status. That's the people at the top drive the people at the bottom. Bourdieu, that's his theory. Historians, economists, were studying things like that, the star effects and amenities. Okay, I'm giving you some interesting, surprising, big kinds of things which we've come up with and which are informing our interrelated courses and interrelated books here. I'll just hold up one more here briefly. Scenescapes. This is the sort of idea related to Balzac and Baudelaire was it's not just the neighborhood, but the sea. If you're swimming in Lake Michigan and you look up at the skyscrapers, say, wow, that's a sea. I bike all around Chicago. I look for things I'm watching, and I see people really waiting. And Gary Becker has done a paper in Greenwich Village in front of restaurants. And if there's a long line outside a restaurant, people waiting to get in, people say, hey, what's this restaurant? Oh, it's really good. I'm going to get in the line too. Okay. What's the economic fancy term for that? Buzz. Okay, so we've studied buzz. We've measured buzz in a bunch of different ways, and we're doing it all over in China. Big conference, 2 million people. We've got a lot of people working on these things. That is, this came out in, I forgot, 8-10 years ago. When this came out in Chinese, they had a terrific overview of the thing, and it's really taken off. We have a scenes academy. We had a group this size at the beginning talking about scenes. 5-6 years later, that is 2 weeks ago in December, we had 2 million people online participating in these things. Not all in one neighborhood, not in just one place, because the internet connects you with all kinds of people talking about the arts. But not just the arts, but scenes. And if you're a city manager or a mayor or a councilor, or you want to sell products that can make your city or make the police car or the bus stops look nicer, solar panels that have an appeal. If you drive around, look at pictures, take a look at the pictures in Chinese cities today. It's phenomenal. Look at the airports. Look at the downtown Beijing. When they had the Olympics, I mean, they tore down housing of something like 30,000 people. They moved them all out, and they had international competitions, fancy architects, and they got the prizes. Not the Chinese architects did not win. They were fighting against the Chinese government. The mayor, city government nationally said, no, they were the biggest. They have Italian, German, Argentine building and but they have these fantastic, dramatic individual buildings which carry on, and they redefine the downtown of Beijing in terms of its scene. And so the idea of a scene is that, so that in turn has been picked up in conjunction with talking about these things all over China. And so anyway, we have a case study of a city really doing this. They've been doing it about for 6 years with us, and now there's a book on that. Shame to. So I'm mentioning the Scenes Academy in China, but then it's internationally with people in Europe, Middle East as well, working on scenes and these kinds of things, building on the idea of amenities. That is, I took the idea of amenities from economics. But Ed Glazer, who'd really written about this, and the students of Gary Becker, said, all right, we have, and what economists classically model is to say, what's the impact of, say, one cinema, one bus stop, or having more buses if we do this in more frequent buses? What's the impact of that on land value or of people driving from Evanston? So I mean, Ed Glazer in that example, the bumps have an economic impact, but he's assuming ceteris paribus. Other things equal, because he knows he can't get all the other things that matter. And so maybe, how can you estimate those things? Okay, so I taught an urban economics course and worked with these people, talking to the economists 40 years ago, 30 years ago. And I said, we got a lot of we now got more data. We got big data coming around, folks. We can download all sorts of things that we couldn't when they started. I mean, at the beginning, they had one dependent variable. January temperature. How much does that have an impact on land value and so forth? That was pretty darn simple. So what we said, or what we did, which is original here, was to say, let's take the view, the skyscraper, a whole bunch of things, and then not take them alone individually, but put them all together and say, if we have the 4-mile downtown area of Chicago, what are the amenities which we can measure and put in there and see how much those make an impact? Not try to estimate one alone, like the bumps in the road that Glazer is still doing. Let's look at the differences between Evanston and Chicago. More than just the bumps in the road. There are a whole lot of other variables. Let's try to measure them. And so get some of those Suburbs are different from central cities. Okay, that's a first cut, but that's pretty crude. Where and why? Which neighborhood in the city? Which suburb? And which part of the, why is Evanston different from Winnetka and so forth? People who are shopping around, listen to them talking. There's a lot of literature on this. That is, that people do it ethnographically. We can do it systematically as well. And so the idea of the scene is to capture lots of things that define either a street, one individual street, or getting a zip code. And so we've got measures, we've created measures for over something like 35,000 zip codes across the US. All the zip codes for which we have reasonable data. And we can give them names: glamour, neighborliness, localism, transgression, legitimacy, traditional legitimacy, bureaucratic legitimacy. We've got these things measured because we've got indicators that can contrast how these different dimensions of amenities that can attract you to move there or to invest there, or to say, let's measure how much the city government is spending on parks or museums or public education and so forth. So where and how to do this and how much, and then to also include the suburbanization and people exurbanization. We just, one of the papers presented at the Scenes Academy meeting was from our top Japanese collaborator. He's really trying to model a lot of people after had the nuclear problems in about 10 years ago with a nuclear facility that was leaking into the water, and a lot of people said, maybe we shouldn't live so near like Tokyo. And so people, that's one. The second one, big one, is COVID. A lot of people, downtown office space drop way down. Lots of people want to work at home, but they also don't just work at home in Tokyo. They're going 300 miles away, sitting on top of a mountain. I use a physical therapist as a woman who used to really one of the top people in Chicago. She now does mountain biking at the top of a mountain in Colorado. And all of her patients are over computer. Okay, so how can and so one of our collaborators, Hee-Sung Jong, another Korean who's working here, she did a study and measured, if you have murals on the wall, how much impact might that have? And basically, that and other things related were featured in a New York Times story last summer on artistic jazz, artistic buzz, and then a subtitle on the same kinds of things that we're talking about. So developers, and one of the lead-ins of the story was, if you want to invest and you potentially own an office, or you live think about having an office building in a downtown big city, how can you make people come back or stay or want to be nearby? Restaurants, catering, all kinds of things which can be done, that is, not just that. You can have, what do they have in New Orleans right now after they had this is on the front page of some of the newspapers. If somebody drives a truck into the crowd in New Orleans in Bourbon Street, what happened the next day? What happens if you go to a big convention in a hotel in downtown New Orleans in the last 30, 40 plus years? What happens when you arrive near those hotels before a big convention? You'll have a jazz band playing in the street. You can have 50 people. They're playing, So jazz really makes us different. You don't get this at 42nd Street in Manhattan. No, you got to come to New Orleans. You want to be treated as an aesthetic, sensitive person. Okay, Balzac and Baudelaire are alive. And we're now not just riding through over the bumps over the hill. Okay, I'm talking enough to give you a flavor of the course. We have I'll make one more thing which links this to the specifics, is the sections of the course are different from what, say, Saskia Sassen and others would do on globalization. They see the world, and as Lenin did, top down. The UN, the EU, these kinds of things. And so she'd write about Wall Street. What this course does is to say, let's take the core issues that have been already studied, where we got good literatures about markets with Adam Smith, political culture with Daniel Almazar, Tocqueville for participation and legitimacy, ethnic politics and ethnicity driving neighborhoods and so forth. How do these things that have been very actively studied, we got a lot of models, a lot of data and so forth. Let's say how strong and how do these change in conjunction with globalization? That is not say it's globalization is everything, but how strong is it? That's the guiding focus of the course. And so globalization is a messy concept, but yeah, here we go. Boschkin, for one of the main readings answering this is, what's globalization? He says 7 different ways. It can be a large monocentric urban area that's a big city. Second, it may be, this is Saskia Sassen, command center for the global economy, that's Wall Street. The third is, hey, global entertainment, Hollywood, Paris, Chicago for triathlons. World Center for Research, here, Berkeley, Madison, Cambridge, Palo Alto. These would be small places. These are not big cities. But lots of people are world centers for research. Global Center for Multicultural Exchange. International Transport Gateway. Airplanes, airports, trains. Trains is number 7. Okay, so the idea is all of these are globalization. It's not, so one approach is, well, you should add them all up, but that doesn't make sense, because the global entertainment and the World Center for Research is going to be a totally different kind of place than some of the others. So what we do in the course is to say, let's let the author, the analyst, the policymaker, who are doing one way of trying to say, why are people taking the job in North Dakota or not? Let's try to say, let's use the specific theory, the context of those assumptions, those data, with its limits, not necessarily limits. Almost all the readings have something new and interesting to say in some way, but they all have limits in the sense that some are big for big cities, some are for China, some are for France, and so forth. Just Chicago. But if Chicago's wild, then why is it different? What we do is specifically stress the scene or the context, not just the assumptions, or say the way many political philosophers of science, economists will often say, these are the assumptions under which this theory will hold, and we'll leave them out. Instead of saying that theoretically or conceptually, we can say, let's try to look at where and why the variations differ and help explain the land value or the educational cost, or the quality of teachers, let's say student high school test scores compared to other kinds of measures of the amenities which are working in different ways, with the strengths and the weaknesses of those specialists in each of these policy areas. So my quick generalization is, each theory should be contextualized. Part of the theory itself is not just X1, X2, and X3, but the example, in a sense, is globalization. And or more generally, we should have not just globalization, but other kinds of things which could be income, education, so forth. Okay, I've talked pretty much. Nevertheless, open to all kinds of questions. I usually try to well, it depends. If you have, I've been, that is 20 years ago, students flooded up questions all the time. They interrupted me. Oh my God, what? Now, usually you don't say anything. So I'll try to encourage you to talk, but you get 10% of the grade from participation. You can come here and talk. You can write a paper. You can write memos. You can do videos. And all of those will help improve your grade. Thoughts on, questions? How many of you heard any of these main ideas in other courses? A little bit. What was the course?
Society, Power, and Change.
Okay. So that's part of the core?
No, it's another sociology.
Okay. Who taught that?
Julian Go.
Okay, good. Okay. Anybody else had a course that overlaps with some of these? Or what's that course?
I mean, just in a few ways, but I took an international human rights law course for my major in human rights, and so obviously globalization is talked about a lot in like the influence of that, and how I think human rights is being, more decolonized because there was pushback.
Okay, good. Anybody else have questions or comments? Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the assessment. So I believe there's
Okay, put your mask on just a little bit. I didn't hear your voice.
yeah. So I was just wondering about the assessment. I think
How what persistent?
assessment,
Assessment.
assignments. Right? So there's a midterm and there's a
Midterm and
final.
final. Yeah, the only thing that's really required for college students is midterm and final. You voluntary, you can add a paper, the more any kind of participation that you want.
And so I'm not sure whether there are any other graduate students here, but I'm a graduate student. So I was just wondering, like what's the scope of the content of it? Because
If we can link you to doing a master's thesis or other papers, you can do that in combination, and we recommend also doing the exams, ideally. But I would, if we can talk if you want afterward in some way, but if you link it to the MA or something like that, that would be great too. Question? Yes?
What's the structure of those exams?
40% I think are ID questions. You know, like the definition of globalization, and 60% is an essay. Maybe two topics will give you two or three topics, and you write an essay on a topic. You know, why is Chicago so successful with its? That's it. Okay. Anything else? All right. See you on Wednesday.